at your bank balance. Go on, picture the number. Now answer me this, where is it? Not the app, not the card in your pocket, the money. Where is the actual thing? You already know the answer, and it is strange enough that most people never sit with it. There is nothing there. There is no pile of anything with your name on it. What you have is a number in somebody's ledger, a record that says you are owed. That is it. That is your money. And here is the part that should stop you. That arrangement is not modern. It is not a product of banks or computers or the internet. It is the oldest form of money we have ever found, and it is older than coins by more than 2,000 years. Before there was a single coin anywhere on Earth, people in the cities of ancient Iraq were already doing exactly what your bank does, recording who owed what in clay. We are going to go back to the very beginning of money in this episode. And on the way, I am going to show you something I think is genuinely one of the strangest facts in human history. The reason writing was invented at all. Not for poetry, not for scripture, not for law or kings or stories. Writing was invented to do the books. By the end of the next half hour, you will know where money actually came from, why the story you were told in school is probably wrong, and why the coin, the thing most of us assume is money, arrives almost at the end of this story rather than the beginning. Let us start with a lump of clay the size of a marble. Picture a village in the Near East 9,000 years ago. There is no writing. There will not be writing for another 5,000 years. There are no cities yet, no kings, no temples of the kind we would recognize. What there is surplus. That is the new thing. People have begun to farm, and farming does something no other way of life had done before. It produces more than you need today. Grain that has to last until next harvest. Animals that are wealth on legs, oil, cloth, wool. And the moment a household has more than it can eat this week, a problem appears that had never existed before. You have to remember how much went into the store, how much came out, how much your neighbor contributed to the festival, and how much came back to him, how much the household owes when the season turns. Memory is not good enough for that. Not across years, not across a whole community, not when there is anything to argue about. So somebody, and we do not know who, and we never will, starts making little shapes out of clay. They are small, a centimeter, give or take, and they come in a set of standard forms: cones, spheres, discs, cylinders, tetrahedrons, ovoids. Archaeologists find them by the thousand across an enormous stretch of the ancient Near East, from around 7,500 to 3,500 years before Christ. For a long time, nobody knew what they were. They turn up on the floors of ordinary houses and in the rooms of temples, and for decades they were cataloged as gaming pieces or amulets or simply as unidentified small objects. The scholar who worked out what they actually are is Denise Schmandt-Besserat, and her answer reframed the whole story. They are counters. Each shape stands for one unit of one particular commodity: a cone for one measure of grain, a sphere for a larger measure, a cylinder for an animal. The shape carries the what, the number of tokens carries the how many, and what were they counting? Contributions. What each household and workshop put into the communal store and what came back out of it to support people who could not support themselves or to fund a religious festival. Read that again, because it matters for everything that follows. The very first accounting system we can find was not built to make anybody rich. It was built to keep track of obligations inside a community. Who has given? Who is owed? Who still has to make good? That is not a market, that is a ledger. There is a detail about where these tokens turn up that changes how you should picture all of this. They are not found in one place. They come out of the floors of ordinary village houses and out of the rooms of city temples. Both at the same time, which tells you that this was never a single institution's private technology. It was not a royal accounting department that everybody else was subject to. Ordinary households were keeping counts for their own purposes, in the same shapes, at the same time as the large institutions were, a shared system running at every scale of the society at once. That is what a standard looks like when it is genuinely adopted, rather than imposed. And the tokens keep going for a very long time. The main span runs from around 7,500 to 3,500 years before Christ. 4,000 years of the same basic idea. I want to put that number next to something for comparison. 4,000 years is longer than the entire distance between the building of the Great Pyramid and this sentence. The token system was not a brief experiment on the way to something better. It was, for most of its life, simply how it was done. A settled technology that worked generation after generation and that nobody had any reason to replace. There is a particular cache worth naming. At Susa, in what is now Western Iran, tokens have been dated to around 3,300 years before Christ. Some scholars will go as far as to call those the world's first money. I would put it slightly more carefully than that, and it is worth being clear about why. Whether you call a clay counter money depends entirely on your definition. If money means a thing you hand over to settle a debt in a single motion, then no, these are not that. If money means an agreed unit that lets strangers keep score of obligations across time, then yes, and by a wide margin. Which of those definitions you prefer is not really an archaeological question. It is a question about what you think money is for. Hold that question. It comes back at the end of this episode, and it is the whole reason the coin takes so long to arrive. And already, 9,000 years ago, money is behaving the way it behaves in your banking app. It is not a substance, it is a record. Now, if money is a record, records have a weakness. Anyone can change them. Suppose you and I settle a deal. I owe you 5 measures of barley at harvest. We seal it with 5 clay cones. Fine, until one of those cones goes missing. Or a 6th appears. There is nothing in a handful of loose tokens that fixes the count. So they solved it. And the solution is one of the most elegant things I know of in the ancient world. They took the tokens for a transaction, the 5 cones, and they sealed them inside a hollow ball of clay, an envelope. Archaeologists call these buli. Once the clay dried, the contents were fixed. You could not add a token or take one away without breaking the envelope, and a broken envelope is obvious to everybody. The count was now tamper-proof. But it had bought that security at a price, and you can probably see what it is. You cannot read a sealed envelope. To know what a contract said, you had to destroy it. Which meant that in a storeroom full of these things, nobody could check anything without smashing the very record they were trying to check. So they made one more adjustment. Before sealing the tokens inside, they pressed each token into the soft outer surface of the envelope. Now the outside carried a picture of what was in the inside. 5 cone-shaped impressions on the shell, 5 cones within. And for a while, that was the system. A sealed ball with its contents advertised on its skin, until somebody, again unnamed, again one of the accountants, noticed the obvious thing. If the marks on the outside already tell you everything, what exactly are the tokens on the inside for? And they stopped putting them in. The ball flattened into a tablet. The impressions stayed. The 3-dimensional tokens had been reduced to 2-dimensional signs, marks on a surface that stood for things in the world. That is writing. Not a metaphor for writing. Not a precursor to writing. That is the step. It happens in Mesopotamia around 3,200 years before Christ, at Uruk and at Susa, and within 2 or 3 centuries, the whole business of goods coming in and going out is being recorded on clay tablets, with the tokens abandoned entirely. So when we say writing was invented for accounting, this is what we mean. Not that accountants happen to be early adopters. The accounting is what turned into the writing. The first sentences human beings ever wrote down were not prayers or poems. They were receipts. And it goes further than that, because there is a second invention buried in the same clay. In the early system, you could not separate the number from the thing. A cone did not mean 1. A cone meant 1 measure of grain. If you wanted to count sheep, you needed a different sign entirely. The quantity and the commodity were welded together. And that is why the token set had to have so many shapes. Barley was the most traded commodity in the region, and its measures were the ones everybody handled every day. And over time, those familiar barley marks began to be used for other things. Then, for more things. Until the marks came loose from barley altogether, and a wedge simply meant 1, and a circle simply meant 10. Numbers that could count anything at all. Let me slow down on that, because it goes past very fast, and it is one of the largest things that has ever happened to human thought. In the old system, the number and the thing were one object. A cone was not one. A cone was one measure of grain. If you wanted to record 3 sheep, you needed the sheep sign 3 times. There was no way to write 3 on its own, because 3 on its own was not a thing anybody had ever needed to say. Think about what that costs you. Every new commodity needs a new sign. The system grows sideways forever, and there is no way to do arithmetic across categories, because the categories cannot be separated from the counting. Now watch what the barley marks do. Barley was the most traded commodity in the region. Its measures were the ones every clerk handled every day, more often than any other. And because they were so familiar, they started being borrowed. Was used to count something that was not barley, then something else. Then something else again. And at some point, the connection simply wore through. The wedge stopped meaning 1 measure of barley and came to mean plainly 1. The circle came to mean 10. Numbers had come loose from things. Once that has happened, you can add a quantity of oil to a quantity of cloth and get a meaningful answer. You can multiply. You can calculate interest and rations in areas of fields and the labor needed to dig a canal. Every piece of mathematics anyone has ever done sits on the far side of that step. It was not a philosophical discovery. Nobody sat down to think about the nature of quantity. It fell out of a filing system because a clerk needed to write something down and reached for the mark that was closest to hand. The people who did this left no names. Schmandt-Besserat gives the credit to the accountants of the Uruk administration, collectively, because that is as precise as the evidence allows anyone to be. There is no statue. There is no inscription saying who first used a wedge to mean nothing but 1. The most important invention of the ancient world in the credit line reads, the bookkeepers. That is abstraction. That is arithmetic becoming possible, and it came out of a storeroom. Schmandt-Besserat gives the credit for all of it to the same people, the anonymous clerks of the Uruk administration. No names, no monuments. The most consequential inventors in the history of the species, and we do not know a single one of them. So by around 3,000 years before Christ, we have cities in Mesopotamia running on written accounts. Now I want to answer the question you are probably already asking. If there are no coins, and there are not for another 2,000 years and more, then how does anybody actually pay? Here is where the school version of this story tends to go wrong. The version most of us were taught goes something like, first there was barter. You had grain, I had goats, we swapped, it was clumsy, and eventually somebody invented money to fix it. It is a tidy story. The trouble is that when you look at what the tablets actually say, you do not find that world. What you find is credit. The tablets are dense with obligations. This much barley owed by this person at this date. This much silver due against that delivery. Balances carried, debts settled, accounts squared at harvest. Goods move when they need to move, and the reckoning is kept in writing and settled later. Nobody is standing in a market trying to find a person who happens to want exactly what they have. They are running tabs. Now, I want to be careful here because this is a live argument among historians, and I am not going to hand you one side of it as settled fact. Direct swapping of goods certainly happened. In Mesopotamia and everywhere else, people trade things for things in every society we know of. What the evidence does not support is the sequence, the idea that a barter economy came first and money was invented to rescue it. In the earliest records we have, the accounting is already there. Credit is not a late refinement. It looks like the original condition. But credit needs one thing to work. If I owe you, we both have to agree on how much. You need a common yardstick, a way of saying what a jar of oil is worth in terms of a sheep, without either of us ever holding a jar of oil or a sheep at the moment we settle. Mesopotamia had 2. The first is barley. Obvious enough, everybody grows it, everybody eats it, everybody knows what a measure looks like. The second is silver, and silver is where money starts to feel familiar. They ran what amounts to a silver standard, fixed relationships between measures of barley and set weights of silver. Prices could be quoted in silver, whether or not any silver ever changed hands. Most of the time, it did not. The metal was the ruler, not the payment. And notice that they are running 2 yardsticks at once, barley and silver, side by side, with a fixed relationship between them. That sounds like an accountant's redundancy. It is not. Those 2 rulers are doing genuinely different jobs, and a society needs both. Barley is the one ordinary life is actually lived in. It is what a wage feeds, it is what a family stores. When you want to know whether a household can survive the year, the honest unit is grain, because grain is the thing that is really at stake. But barley has a fatal weakness as a measure of long-term value, and it is the most obvious weakness imaginable. It depends on the harvest. A good year and there is grain everywhere, and a measure of it buys less than it did. A bad year and the same measure is suddenly worth a fortune, at exactly the moment when the people who owe grain are least able to find any. A debt fixed in barley gets heavier in precisely the years the debtor is weakest. Silver does not do that. Silver does not care about the rain. The amount of it in the world changes slowly and for reasons that have nothing to do with whether this particular season was kind. Which makes it a bad measure of what a family needs to eat, and a very good measure of what a debt is worth. Tea. So they used each for what it was good at. Real consumption, reckoned in grain, stored value and long obligations, reckoned in metal, and a published rate between them so the 2 worlds could be translated. That is a more sophisticated arrangement than most people would credit to 4,000 years ago. It is a society that is understood, without any of our vocabulary for it, that the thing you measure prices with and the thing you store wealth in do not have to be the same thing, and that trying to force them to be the same thing causes harm. And it raises a question that this series is going to come back to again and again. If a debt is written in silver and the harvest fails, the debt does not shrink. The obligation is fixed while the ability to pay collapses. Written money is patient in a way that people are not. Clay does not forgive, and a tablet does not know that it was a hard year. That is the shadow side of everything we have been admiring in this episode. The ledger that made civilization possible is the same ledger that can grind a household into nothing, and it does it not out of cruelty, but simply by continuing to be accurate. The Mesopotamians knew this. It is why their records are full of debt, and why debt is one of the oldest political problems there is. We have not solved it either. And when silver did move, this is the detail I love, it moved by weight. There is a surviving spiral coil of silver, and the way it was used is exactly what it looks like. You snip off a length, you weigh it, and that settles the debt. Not a coin, a coil. Money you cut with a blade and check on a balance. This is where a word you use every week comes from. The shekel begins its life not as a coin, but as a weight, a specific quantity of silver, defined against grains of barley. The exact grain count varies between sources, so I will not pretend to a precision the evidence does not have. Think of it as roughly the weight of a small handful of barley grains. The point is the principle. A shekel is a unit on a scale. And once you have a shared yardstick, something remarkable becomes possible. You can write down what a whole society costs, which is precisely what Hammurabi did. The law code of Hammurabi from the Old Babylonian period is famous for its punishments. But read it as an economic document, and it is astonishing. Page after page of prices and wages, quoted in silver shekels. What it costs to hire a boat, what it costs to build a house, what a field laborer is paid, and a man plowing, and a man threshing. What you owe for the tending of oxen and sheep, what the caulking and pitching of a ship comes to. There is even a set fee for the veterinary surgeon. Sit with the range of that list for a second, because the range is the point. Hiring a boat, building a house, caulking and pitching a ship, a field laborer's wage, and separately the rate for a man plowing, and separately again the rate for threshing. The tending of oxen, the tending of sheep, surgery priced 6 different ways depending on the operation and on who is lying on the table, and the veterinarian because the animals mattered enough to have their own tariff. That is not a list of luxuries. That is the working week of an entire civilization, written down and given a number. And to write that list at all, you need something we have been building towards this whole episode. You need every one of those unrelated activities, carpentry, surgery, shepherding, sailing, to be expressible in a single common unit. Ship's caulking and a doctor's incision have nothing in common physically. In silver, they can be compared. That is what a unit of account really buys you. Not payment, comparison. The ability to hold two completely different human activities side by side and say which one the society values more and by how much, which is a power worth thinking carefully about, because somebody has to do the valuing. In Hammurabi's code, that somebody is the state. These are not observed market prices recorded by an economist. They are set rates published as law. The king is telling you what a thing costs, and the moment prices are set rather than discovered, money stops being only a measuring instrument and becomes an instrument of government. Every schedule of official prices in every economy sense, every wage floor, every controlled rent, every regulated fare is doing the same thing this tablet is doing. The tool is 4,000 years old. We are still arguing about how to use it. An entire working world, priced, I should say, unequally, and openly so. A surgeon operating on a nobleman receives 10 shekels of silver. The identical operation on a commoner, 5. The code does not hide the difference. It writes it into law. That tells you something. The numbers alone do not. This was not a neutral measuring system floating above society. It measured a society that had already decided some people were worth more than others, and it recorded that decision in silver, in writing, permanently. Money has never been only a technology. From the very first tablets, it carries the shape of the world that made it. Now let us leave Mesopotamia for a moment, because the same problem was being solved all over the world, and not always with metal. Across different societies in different centuries, you find the same short list of things doing the job: shells, salt, tobacco, cocoa beans, tea, alcohol, copper, silver, gold. At first glance, that list looks random. It is not. Every item on it earns its place by having the same handful of properties. It has to last. Money that rots is not money, which is why grain works as a yardstick but struggles as a store of value, and why nobody ever settled long-term debts in fish. It has to divide. Half a debt needs half a payment. You can weigh out half a measure of salt. You cannot pay half a cow and expect the other half to be worth anything. It has to travel. Wealth you cannot move is wealth. You cannot spend anywhere but here. It has to be recognizable. If I cannot tell the real thing from the fake in a moment, on a dark day, at the edge of a field, then it fails at the exact moment it matters. And it has to be scarce. Not impossible to get, just hard enough that nobody can flood the system. Anything you can gather by the sackful stops being money the moment somebody finds the sack. Run the list through those 5 tests and watch how it sorts itself. Shells, durable, hard to counterfeit, naturally limited in the places far from where they wash up. And they travel beautifully. They pass. Salt, durable if you keep it dry, divides to any quantity you like, universally wanted because it is how you keep food through a winter. It passes on almost every count, and its weakness is the interesting one. Salt is only scarce until somebody controls a source, and then whoever owns the pans owns the money supply. Cocoa beans, tobacco, tea, alcohol, each of them works in a society that wants them, and each carries the same flaw, which is that you can grow more. A commodity money, whose supply responds to a good harvest, is a money that loses value in a good year. Copper, silver, gold, durable to the point of being nearly indestructible, divisible down to shavings, dense enough that real wealth fits in a hand, and, the decisive one, genuinely hard to get more of. You cannot farm silver. You have to find it and dig it. That last property is why the metals eventually win nearly everywhere, and it is worth being precise about the reason. It is not that gold is beautiful or that it has some intrinsic worth. It is that the effort required to increase the supply is high and stays high. The money cannot be quietly diluted by anyone who gets lucky. A society that settles on metal has, in effect, taken the money supply out of the hands of anybody who might want to expand it. Or so it seems. Because there is one way to expand a metal money that does not require finding a single new ounce, and a king will discover it, and it will become one of the great recurring stories of this whole series. But not yet. Not for a long time yet. Run any candidate through those 5 tests, and you can predict whether a society will end up using it. Salt passes almost all of them, and salt was genuinely one of the great traded, taxed, and fought over commodities of the ancient world. And now, let me take something away from you, because I would rather be honest than tell you a good story. You've probably heard that Roman soldiers were paid in salt, and that this is where our word salary comes from. It is repeated constantly. It is on 100 websites, and it may well be where you first met the idea. The evidence for it is thin, and historians have been picking at it for a long time. There is no good basis for the claim that Roman soldiers received their pay as salt rations. I am not telling you that to be pedantic. I am telling you because this episode is about how money actually worked. And the tidy anecdote is exactly the kind of thing that crowds the real story out. Salt does not need the myth. Its actual history as a preservative that decided whether a community survived the winter, and therefore as something worth taxing, hoarding, and controlling, is more interesting than the folk etymology. So, hold on to the 5 properties. They are the reason the list is the list. And they are about to explain why one particular solution finally won. Let us take stock of where we have arrived. By the 2nd millennium before Christ, Mesopotamia has writing, arithmetic, contracts, interest, wages, published prices, and a metal standard by weight. It has, in every functional sense, money. What it does not have is a coin. And I want you to sit with how odd that is. Because the ingredients are all there. They have the silver, they have scales precise enough to run an economy on, they have the concept of a standard unit, they have been using the shekel for centuries. The distance between what they have and an actual coin looks, from here, like nothing at all. So why does it take another 1,000 years and more? Because the thing a coin adds is not metal, and it is not value. It is something much harder to manufacture. Think about what weighed silver actually costs you every single time. Every transaction, somebody has to get out of balance. Somebody has to check that the metal is what it claims to be and not a debased alloy. Somebody has to trust the scale and the person holding it. Every payment is also a small inspection. A coin removes all of that, not by changing the silver, by adding a stamp. The stamp is a claim, made by whoever struck it, that this piece is of a known weight and a known purity. If you believe the issuer, you no longer have to weigh anything. You count, and counting is faster than weighing by an order of magnitude, and it needs no equipment, and it can be done by anybody. That is what a coin is. It is not money. Money was already thousands of years old. A coin is money with an authority's promise pressed into it, and it works exactly as far as that promise is believed, and no further. Which is why it could not appear until there was an authority whose promise would be accepted by strangers. And around 650 to 600 years before Christ, in a kingdom in Western Anatolia, in what is now Turkey, that condition is finally met. The kingdom is Lydia. The metal is electrum, a natural alloy of gold and silver, and the innovation is a piece of it, stamped under royal authority, guaranteed, the world's first coins. From the moment they appear, they spread. Because the problem they solve is one every trading society already had. No more balances, no more assaying, no more arguments at the point of sale. Standardized value and the friction of exchange cut away at a stroke. And notice what that means for the story you were told. The coin is not the beginning of money. The coin is a late optimization on a system that had already been running for thousands of years, a shortcut for trust, invented long after the hard part was solved. The hard part was the ledger. The hard part was persuading human beings that a mark could stand for an obligation, and that the obligation was real. They did that in clay 9,000 years ago, and we have never stopped. So let us go back to the number you pictured at the start. Your balance is a record of what you are owed, kept by an institution, in a system of writing that exists because somebody needed to count barley. When you pay, no substance moves. 2 ledgers adjust. The coin, the thing we think of as real money, turns out to be the odd one out in this story, a 2,500-year-old workaround for the problem of not trusting the person in front of you. You have been using Mesopotamian money your whole life. It just stopped being made of clay. Next Monday on The Story of Money, we go to Lydia. Because that first coin raises a question nobody had needed to ask before. If a stamp is a promise, what happens the first time a king breaks it? The story of the Electrum Stater, the world's first currency, and the discovery that money made of trust can be quietly watered down. That is next time. Follow the channel so you do not miss it.